It's super exciting to see something unexpected when you're in the field, especially when it's at a place where you've spent a lot of time previously. And having that right bird with the right documentation can sort of be this grand slam of getting all the birding clicks excited. A couple times a year, I'll get a message from someone saying, "Oh, what do you think I should do? Where do you think I should go to find something rare? What do you think the right day is going to be? Where do you think the right hotspot's going to be?" And over time, I started to try to distill it down. Where I thought, what are some of these like core fundamental elements that have really helped me when I'm in the field looking for vagrants? So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to break it down. The standard initial one is chance favors the prepared. Knowing the patterns and when and where vagrants have occurred in the past can help you predict what might happen in the future. And I honestly think that this is what records committees were formed for 40, 50, 100 years ago. This information wasn't readily available. So I thought, well, if we can compile this information and get it out there, then people can learn from it and they can build on it and discover more exciting things in the future. But a huge part of being prepared is knowing the common bird species, knowing where they tend to be, what they tend to look like, how their plumage changes throughout the year, or what extremes that you might see within a species. That's the more familiarity you get in that realm, the more likely it is you're going to hone in on something unusual when it is in front of you. The sort of next point builds off that thought where the more you study birds, the more time you spend in the field, you should really start to expect to see unexpected things. Not necessarily vagrants, but you should also be seeing aberrant plumages or hybrids or seasonal anomalies, birds that aren't supposed to be in that place or that time. Even escaped pets, you'll see budgies or parrots flying by. Those are all kind of signs that you're on the right track if that is your goal to find a rare bird, to see these other anomalies and start recognizing them for what they are. I don't want to get too much into the birding community side of it, but I do think that is sometimes a bit of a issue within different groups of people where someone might start questioning someone else's observations, and it usually revolves around, oh, did they get photos or did they not get photos? But I do think that notion of expecting to see other weird birds in the field, not just everything weird is or should be something rare, is what kind of gives people that feeling or that impression. There's lots of hybrid gulls that could, in theory, start to look like another vagrant species due to their mixed traits. Or, you could have a bird that looks a lot like a California gull, but is it 100% a California gull? Birds hybridize. So that is sort of where I think some of that comes from, if you should really be honing in on lots and lots of differences. Not everything different is rare. And my goodness, I know not everyone has a chance to have camera gear, but if you do, I super, super, super recommend photographing anything unusual that catches your eye. And that's not to show other people, but it's for you. It's a remarkable learning opportunity. You can revisit that anomaly at any point in the future as you learn more about birds, or as you hear something new or see something different in the field, and then you want to cross-reference past examples. There's a lot of relatively affordable, relatively high zoom point and shoot cameras that are going to help you document these things. And this is an example for me. I'm not well versed in how to tell some plumages of semi-palmated sandpiper and western sandpiper apart. I took this picture 10 years ago, and I'm still not totally sure which one it is between the two, but maybe someone will tell me in the comments, or maybe I'll figure it out at some point. But I've done that so much, where having this sort of back catalog of things to learn from and reference is super invaluable. Another big one that's hit me over the years is this detectability bias. What does that mean? For me, it's a bird species like varied thrush, where local birders where I live in Ontario would say it's a rare bird, but you would expect a couple to be seen every year. Whereas I started to realize that a lot of these records involve people seeing them at their backyard bird feeders. This big striking bird shows up and it compels them to get pictures and reach out to people who they might know to say, oh, can you help me with this bird, or what is this? Or they figure it out on their own, but word spreads because that bird makes itself so obvious. And the flip side would be like chestnut-collared longspur, which breeds closer to Ontario than varied thrush, but would be considered this mega rarity. I just kind of realized that they're not in people's backyards, and most of their plumages are not particularly flashy. Like they hide from people. They spend their times way out in fields where a vagrant isn't likely to be detected. So I do think it's entirely possible that there would be more chestnut-collared longspurs in Ontario in a given year, just none of them are being noticed. Another kind of on the nose one, but it's definitely if there's a hot spot or a flurry of activity happening, being in the thick of things and seeing a higher number of birds is going to improve your chances at finding a vagrant. Sort of building on that thought a little bit, but I also like to try to stack my habitat types. This is a tip of Point Pelee, great spot for a lake watch, great spot for seeing gulls and shorebirds land on the sandbar. Do a 180 and behind you is the narrow spit of trees that comes to a point. You've got songbirds in the trees, you've got swallows and raptors sheltering on the wind, the leeward side of the trees. So, the more habitat types that you can sort of stack together, the more species there are to sort of draw from for a potential vagrant to show up. Another one I do all the time is, if I'm going to do a stationary watch, like a hawk watch or, morning flight, doing one near a marsh is kind of that added value where you can just kind of keep an eye as to what's going on over the marsh, even if it's not really your primary goal of birding that morning. Another big one for me is getting really good looks at the birds. Seeing them up close or seeing them while they're active helps you notice differences, helps you notice details. It can even help you take pictures if you need to or want to. Gulls are a great example where gulls at a landfill are active, their wings are up, their wings are down, they're fighting with each other. You're taking it all in. When you compare that to a distant group of sleeping gulls where they can keep their heads down for half an hour at a time, where they're mostly hidden, really, really seeing the birds up close, seeing them well, seeing them in good light makes a big difference. And the flip side of that is the birder perspective, where if you're at a lake watch and a strong wind or driving rain can help bring birds in closer to shore to see, you are going to want to find some shelter because the wind can shake your scope and make it hard to see details, or the rain or the cold can affect you and your body, your ability to take pictures. So find some shelter, and that'll improve the experience for you as well. Another interesting thing I found over the years is to embrace the slow days. By nature, some of these vagrant bird species are going against the grain. They're doing something weird. They're moving in a direction that the other birds aren't moving, and that's how they've ended up off course. So, it might be the peak of migration, and I'll hear birders say it. Or they'll say, "Oh, I thought it was going to be better today, but whatever, I'll call it quits, and maybe tomorrow." But one bird can make a big difference. So, sometimes being in those situations can pay off. Sort of on that, this is another one where you might sort of ask yourself, what are my goals when I'm out birding? This one's a bit antisocial, but if you really, really do want to improve your chances at finding rare birds, checking spots with less birder coverage can help. There might be something really striking at a sewage lagoon or at a roost location, but if no one's been there for a month, then no one's noticed it, so it could just be standing there waiting for you. Another big one I've noticed, using lake watching as an example, that a lot of people will scan the horizon with their spotting scope, and you get this sort of really narrow view of what's going on around you. But vagrants seemingly are just as likely to be up high or down low or moving right along the shoreline. So just keeping sort of an eye on a larger portion of the sky or a larger area of the habitat around you could improve your chances, as opposed to just narrowing in on one specific spot. And it's not just lake watching too. I've noticed at morning flight or at hawk watches, certain species will be common that day, and they have a height that they like to fly or a distance they like to fly away from a shoreline. But each bird kind of has its own different preferences. So there is a decent chance that a vagrant might not be embedded in the flight path of all the common birds that day. It might be higher, farther, closer, or lower, just off from the other common birds. That sort of ties into this one where I'll say bird every bird. If there's two big rafts of ducks offshore and you scan through the one flock on your left and you scan through the other flock on your right and you think, oh, I've scanned almost every bird here and I haven't seen anything different, I'll move on. I do think there's a decent chance that that vagrant is not in that flock of common birds. It's tucked up against the shoreline, standing on the rocks. And if you're not hunting out those sort of isolated individuals, you might be decreasing your odds of spotting something different. Here's the one ring to rule them all. That's a bit on the nose, but obviously, like hurricanes and big storms can blow birds off course. That's well known, like petrels come in and off the ocean, but it's not actually the point that I was hoping to make here. I think a critical, interesting part of incorporating weather is that almost every other point that I've mentioned so far does actually have some weather elements to it, if you think about it. Patterns of vagrancy may be tied to climatology from the perspective of what the weather norms are for a given location at a date and time, but also what the extreme limits are of what we might expect for weather at a given place at a given time. It might be that push that really forces a bird to move beyond its normal limits of when it wants to migrate or what migratory path it wants to take. Um, and on the birder side too, right? Being able to get good looks at birds or see them well, whether it's the sun at your back or having the right wind direction to concentrate flight lines of birds. The weather sort of ties into each one of those points. This one is more personal for me, where I'd really say keep an open mind when you're in the field if you're keen on finding vagrants. It really surprises me how many birders I see that see a meadowlark locally where I live and they say eastern meadowlark because that's the only option. It just seems like a lot of people close off the other possibilities immediately. They don't give it a chance. They don't ever say, well, why isn't it a western? It's still most likely going to be an eastern, but that questioning is a great learning opportunity, but you got to at least consider it sometimes. Otherwise, you're definitely not going to find a vagrant if you always assume they're never going to be there. And it's not just the super hard to identify birds like meadowlarks either. Like I'm guilty of it, where there's no yellow-bellied kingbirds where I live. They really stand out, but for some reason, it's the brain just defaults to, well, what's the most likely one, rather than like really giving it some critical thought and working through the different possibilities, even if some are more likely than others. But to circle back to the super hard to identify species, say you're keen to try to find your first European herring gull now that the species have been split, you really got to be honest with yourself about what we know or what you know or what's possible to know about some of these super hard IDs. It is easy to pigeonhole some possible field marks or some potential features and say, well, it must be this because this, when birds are variable and there's still a lot we don't know and we're learning every day. So you got to keep that in mind to not go too far in the opposite direction. I did mention at the start how the right flashy vagrant, the right time, the right place can bring birders of all clicks and skill levels and interests together, into this excitement. But also, sort of the wrong situation or the wrong attitude can really turn them all off in their own unique ways. So I think if you are super keen on finding vagrants, it would be really helpful to keep that open mind and to learn and to treat your identifications as fluid, where you don't have to know everything right away before you see every bird. You can grow with time. You can change your IDs as you've learned new things in the future, as you learn new things from other people. But also, like, do it for yourself. Don't do it for the recognition. Don't do it for the clicks or the thumbs up on the internet group. You be you. Be happy with where you're at and be happy to make changes as you go. So if you're down with that, if you're still here, it's time to reveal the secret sauce, the one true thing that stands above everything I've said so far. If you really, really want to find a rare bird, nothing is going to help you more than just go birding. Turn off your phone, log off the computer for a while. I'm not saying this to be cheesy. Literally, the more time you spend out looking at birds, the more likely you are to find something rare. And you're going to want to spend more time in the field if you're having fun doing it. So try to have fun, get out there. It's way better than all those other points that I mentioned. So that's the deal. There's a text version of these points at a link below if you want to check it out. A bunch of other ideas for birding and weather and concentrations and vagrants and hybrids and hotspots, et cetera, et cetera. If you've got any other secret weapons in your arsenal, or if you have any thoughts to add or query about what I've said, I'm always keen for discussion. You can either leave a comment or reach out to me. I always love talking about birds. And otherwise, I hope you have a fantastic time in the field. Yeah, even if your goal is not to find vagrants, whatever they are, have fun out there.